Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Historicalish. This is the first episode in the World War II Mysteries and Oddities Iceberg. We're going to switch it up a little bit this time, with each episode being an individual tier rather than 10 items within each individual tier. I know many of you are familiar with iceberg charts, but if you're not, they're essentially a chart that lists out different topics, with the top of the chart being the more well-known topics, and the further down you go, the more obscure and not well-known some of the topics can get. If you do enjoy these types of videos, go check out the Ancient Mysteries Icebergs that I've previously done. You can find them on my channel. And if you do enjoy these, make sure you like and subscribe. It definitely helps me out a lot. But without further ado, let's jump right in. MIA soldiers. Researching MIA, or missing in action soldiers from World War II, uncovers a lot of information that I wouldn't just be able to cover in a single video, much less an iceberg video. The mystery, if you can call it that, surrounding MIA soldiers is multifaceted, encompassing why so many servicemen went missing, the efforts taken to find them, and the theories or stories that have emerged over the years. World War II, as most everybody probably knows, lasted from 1939 to 1945, involving most of the world's nations. It was characterized by significant battles across Europe, the Pacific, North Africa, and Asia. The chaotic nature of warfare, coupled with the vast theaters of conflict, led to a high number of casualties and soldiers missing in action. It's estimated that there were over 73,000 American servicemen alone who remained unaccounted for by the end of the war. The mystery of the MIA soldiers primarily revolves around the circumstances that led to their disappearance. Many were lost during major battles, where the confusion and destruction made it impossible to keep track of every soldier. Others went missing behind enemy lines or were lost at sea. Post-war governments and non-governmental agencies initiated efforts to locate and identify MIA soldiers. This involves scouring battlefields, interviewing witnesses, and utilizing modern technology to identify their remains. The U.S. Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, or the DPAA, is one of the agencies actively involved in such efforts, using forensic science to assist in identifying their remains and providing closure to families. Several theories and stories have emerged concerning MIA soldiers. Some speculate about soldiers starting new lives in foreign countries or being held captive long after the war had ended. Others involve accounts of unidentified remains being discovered in remote locations, leading to complex investigations to figure out their identities. One of the most enduring mysteries involves the fate of soldiers lost in specific battles or operations, such as those involved in the Battle of the Bulge or in the Pacific Islands, where the terrain and circumstances led to higher likelihood of soldiers going MIA. In addition, there are stories of ghost soldiers who were reported dead but turned up alive, leading to questions about the accuracy of wartime records and the chaos that often accompanied the reporting of casualties. So, since this topic is kind of broad, here are some of the more interesting stories that I've found. The first is the soldier who vanished and reappeared in the Soviet Union. Joseph Burl is known for his remarkable story of being a part of the 101st Airborne Division, getting captured by the Germans, escaping, and then fighting alongside a Soviet tank battalion. After being captured in Normandy, Burl was taken to a POW camp from which he escaped. He managed to link up with a Soviet tank brigade, with whom he fought until he was eventually wounded. He was then evacuated to a hospital in Moscow, making him one of the few soldiers to have served in both the US and Soviet forces during World War II. He was initially listed as KIA by the US military until his return. There's also the story of the Japanese soldier who refused to surrender. Hiro Onoda was an intelligence officer in the Imperial Japanese Army who continued to fight the war on Lubang Island in the Philippines until 1974. Refusing to believe that the war had ended, Onoda and a few other comrades lived in the mountains, conducting guerrilla operations and surviving off the land. All his companions either left or died, leaving Onoda alone, and he was finally persuaded to come out of hiding and surrender only after his former commander was flown in to formally relieve him from duty. Then there's the story of the British soldier who escaped over 200 times. Horace Greasley, a British POW, famously escaped from his camp more than 200 times to meet with a German girl he had fallen in love with, only to willingly return each time to the POW camp. His story became widely known after the publication of his memoirs. Then there is the Ghost of Bataan Death March. During the Bataan Death March, there were thousands of American and Filipino soldiers who were forced to march under severe conditions by the Japanese army in the Philippines, and there were numerous accounts of soldiers going MIA. One such story involves a group of soldiers who were reported seen marching with the group by survivors long after it was believed they had died or been killed. So yeah, that one's pretty interesting to dive into. But since this topic is so broad, it's kind of hard to get super specific in individual mysteries or stories, but we'll just move on. Germans fled to Argentina. The narrative of Germans fleeing to Argentina after World War II shows a fascinating and controversial chapter in post-war history, blending verified facts with myths and conspiracy theories. This phenomenon reflects the complex aftermath of the war, the escape routes established by former Nazis, and the role of various nations in harboring war criminals. After World War II, as the Allied forces uncovered the extent of Nazi atrocities and began persecuting war criminals, many former Nazis and collaborators sought refuge to avoid capture and trial. Argentina, under President Juan Perón, emerged as a prominent haven for these individuals, due in part to its neutral stance during most of the war and Perón's open-door immigration policy. The escape of Nazis to Argentina was facilitated by a network of routes and contacts known as rat lines. We'll get more into that later. These rat lines were composed of smuggling routes that led through Europe to Spain or Italy, from where individuals could sail to Argentina or other South American countries. Funny enough, the Vatican and the Red Cross were implicated in some accounts, accused of providing assistance in the form of travel documents to fleeing Nazis under the guise of humanitarian aid. Perhaps the most infamous Nazi found in Argentina was Adolf Eichmann, one of the key architects of the Holocaust. Captured by Israeli Mossad agents in Buenos Aires in 1960, Eichmann's subsequent trial and execution brought significant attention to Argentina as a refuge for war criminals. Other notable figures include Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death from Auschwitz, who also lived in South America for years before drowning in Brazil in 1979. Over the years, the topic of Germans fleeing to Argentina has been rife with speculation. Conspiracy theories include those about Hitler's survival and escape to Argentina, though these claims lack credible evidence and are widely discredited by historians. This theory suggests that Hitler escaped from Berlin in the final days of the war and traveled to Argentina via submarine. Proponents of this theory often cite the known fact that several U-boats made their way to Argentina after the war, some surrendering to Argentine authorities months after the war in Europe had ended. The theory states that one of these submarines secretly carried Hitler, and sometimes even Eva Braun, to South America. There have been some supposed sightings of him in Argentina, but nothing has ever been confirmed, so we'll just leave it at that. Die Glocke. Die Glocke, or the Bell, is one of World War II's most intriguing and controversial mysteries, often accompanied by speculation, conspiracy theories, and very little historical evidence. Its story touches upon the realms of advanced technology, secret Nazi projects, and the limits of our understanding of the period's scientific endeavors. It's alleged to have been a top-secret Nazi scientific technological device, experiment, or even a weapon that was developed towards the end of the war. Reports and theories suggest that it was part of the Nazi regime's efforts to achieve a technological edge through unconventional and revolutionary research. It was described as being a bell-shaped device, hence its name, which was purportedly capable of producing destructive vibrations or even harnessing gravitational forces. Some accounts attribute it with anti-gravity capabilities, others suggest it was involved in time travel experiments, or was a type of new weapon of unprecedented power. These descriptions are often based on speculative interpretations of post-war testimonies, declassified documents, and the writings of journalists and authors who have delved into the subject. The primary source of information about Die Glocke comes from the works of Polish journalist and author Igor Witkowski, who claimed to have discovered evidence of its existence in transcripts of a Polish war crimes trial. According to Witkowski, Die Glocke was constructed with exotic materials and used in experiments that had lethal effects on living beings. His accounts were later popularized by authors such as Nick Cook and Joseph P. Farrell, who tied the device to anti-gravity research and other advanced technologies. Skeptics argue that the evidence for Die Glocke is circumstantial and anecdotal at best, pointing out that there is no physical proof that has ever been found to verify its existence. Critics of the theory suggest that the story of Die Glocke may be a conflation of various scientific projects or a misinterpretation of less sensational wartime research. Die Glocke is often associated with other legendary Nazi projects, such as the alleged base in Antarctica and UFO-related technologies, but, it is speculated to have been moved to a secret location, possibly in South America or Antarctica, following the war. contributing to a web of conspiracy theories about hidden Nazi enclaves and advanced technology and Agartha and all that fun stuff. So yeah, Die Glocke remains one of the most captivating and elusive mysteries of World War II, but the lack of concrete evidence and the speculative nature of the accounts surrounding it mean that it occupies a space more in the realm of alternative history and science fiction rather than in historical verified fact, but honestly, you never know with them. The Lost Gold Train. The legend of the Nazi Lost Gold Train is a pretty cool story that has honestly trolled treasure hunters for a long time. Stemming from the chaotic final days of World War II, this myth involves a supposed hidden train filled with gold, jewels, and other treasures looted by the Nazis, which is believed to be buried or concealed in a secret tunnel system in the Lower Silesia region of Poland. So, as the war drew to a close and the Allies advanced into German-occupied territories, the Nazis began to move wealth, artifacts, and stolen valuables to safer locations. This was part of a broader effort to protect these assets from falling into Allied hands and potentially fund a resurgence of the regime in the future. Lower Silesia, with its complex system of tunnels and mines, became a focal point for such activities due to its strategic and geographical advantages. According to the legend, in 1945, as the Soviet army was advancing, a train filled with gold, precious metals, art, and stolen valuables departed from Breslau but never reached its destination. The train is said to have disappeared without a trace, sparking rumors that it was hidden in one of the many tunnels in the Owl Mountains, a part of the Project Reese tunnel complex, which was a massive and still incomplete Nazi construction project. Over the years, numerous theories have emerged about the train's fate, with some suggesting it was buried in a collapsed tunnel, and others proposing it was hidden in a secret underground station. Obviously, the allure of untold riches has led to multiple expeditions and searches, utilizing everything from ground-penetrating radar to just simple excavations in itself. But since it's here, none have conclusively proven the train's existence. Skeptics argue that there's no historical evidence to confirm the train's existence, pointing out that records from the period are extensive yet contain no mention of such a train. But I guess if you have a train full of valuables that you want to keep hidden and secret, why put it in the records? Skeptics also argue that the logistical challenges of hiding an entire train laden with tons of gold and valuables in a secret location under the duress of an advancing enemies kind of just adds to the skepticism. So there's that. Despite the doubts, the legend of the Lost Gold Train has become a part of local lore and a significant cultural phenomenon. It has inspired books, documentaries, and even festivals in Poland, drawing tourists and treasure hunters from around the world. The Polish government has occasionally permitted searches, but with caution due to the potential for unexploded wartime ordnance and the destabilization of old mining tunnels. So maybe they already found it. Unit 731. Unit 731 represents one of the darkest and most horrific chapters in the history of wartime medical experimentation. Operating under the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II, this secret unit conducted brutal experiments on thousands of prisoners of war and civilians, including men, women, and children, primarily in occupied China. The activities of Unit 731 raised profound ethical, moral, and legal questions about human rights, medical ethics, and war crimes. Unit 731, officially known as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army, was established in the early 1930s by General Shiro Ishii. Its primary facility was located in Pingfang near Harbin in the Japanese puppet state of Manchukuo, which is now just northeast China. Although it is one of several units conducting biological and chemical warfare research, Unit 731 was by far the most notorious due to the scale and nature of its experiments. The experiments conducted by Unit 731 were wide-ranging and included the testing of grenade and flamethrower injuries on live subjects, frostbite testing, and injections with diseases such as typhus, cholera, and anthrax. Prisoners were also subjected to forced pregnancies and pressure chamber tests that led to death. The unit's research into biological warfare led to the development of plague bombs, which were tested on Chinese cities, causing outbreaks of diseases including plague and cholera. The exact number of victims is hard to determine, but estimates suggest that thousands of individuals, including Chinese civilians and military personnel, Korean and Russian POWs, and possibly Allied POWs, were subjected to these experiments. The victims were referred to not as human beings, but as logs, a obviously very dehumanizing term. At the end of World War II, the activities of Unit 731 came to an abrupt halt. The unit's facilities were destroyed, and documents related to its experiments were either hidden or destroyed. In a controversial move that has since been the subject of much ethical debate, some members of 731, including its leader, Hirohito, were actually granted immunity from prosecution by the United States in exchange for the data that they had collected through their human experimentation. Not to justify this, but in the terms of historical context, this decision was made in the context of the Cold War, as the U.S. was interested in the research for its biological warfare program. But in my opinion, definitely extremely evil. The legacy of Unit 731 continues to be a source of tension in East Asia, particularly between China and Japan. The unit's activities are often cited as among the most egregious examples of wartime medical experimentation on human subjects. The ethical implications of the use of 731's research by other nations, and the decision to grant immunity to its members, continue to provoke debate about justice, accountability, and the ethics of scientific research obtained through inhumane practices. Hirohito war crime involvement. The question of Emperor Hirohito's involvement in war crimes committed by Japan during World War II remains a complex and controversial topic in both historical and political discourse. Hirohito was the 124th Emperor of Japan, reigning from 1926 until his death in 1989, and presided over the country during a period marked by aggressive military expansion, the invasion of neighboring countries, and numerous atrocities committed by the Japanese military. As the head of state and the theoretical supreme commander of the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy, Hirohito's role in Japan's wartime actions have been scrutinized to determine his responsibility for the decisions that led to the suffering of millions across Asia and the Pacific. The nature of the Japanese political system and the emperor's role within it, however, complicates this assessment. During World War II, Japanese forces were responsible for numerous war crimes, including the rape of Nanking, the use of biological and chemical weapons, forced labor, and the ill treatment and massacre of prisoners of war, and the enslavement of women as comfort women. These acts have been the subject of much historical investigation and moral condemnation. Debate continues over the extent of Hirohito's direct involvement or responsibility for these war crimes. Some historians argue that Hirohito had significant influence over military decisions and was aware of the actions of the Japanese military abroad. Others contend that the emperor had limited power or was kept uninformed about the extent of military actions, citing the complex interplay between the imperial institution, the military, and government officials. After Japan's surrender in 1945, the role of Hirohito and the question of his culpability in war crimes were central issues to Allied occupation of Japan. General Douglas MacArthur, supreme commander for the Allied powers, decided not to persecute Hirohito as a war criminal, believing that maintaining the emperor in a ceremonial role would facilitate a more peaceful and stable transition for Japan. This decision was controversial and has been criticized for allowing Hirohito to avoid accountability for Japan's wartime actions. Instead, a number of military leaders and government officials were tried and convicted for war crimes, while Hirohito's image was transformed from a godlike sovereign to a symbol of national unity and peace. In Japan and across Asia, perspectives vary widely, with some viewing Hirohito as a figure who led Japan into war, and others seeing him as a passive ruler caught in the tide of militarism. Scholarly work and the release of documents have shed more light on this period, but Hirohito's personal responsibility for war crimes remains a contentious issue. The debate touches on broader questions of leadership accountability, the complexities of historical memory, and the challenges of reconciling the past in the context of post-war peace and reconciliation efforts. So yeah, we just don't know. Who snitched on Anne Frank? The question of who betrayed Anne Frank and her family, leading to their arrest by the Gestapo on August 4th, 1944, remains one of the biggest mysteries of World War II. Anne Frank, a Jewish girl hiding in Amsterdam with her family and others during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, became world famous posthumously through the publication of her diary, which detailed her life in hiding. Over the years, numerous theories and investigations have attempted to identify the informant who led the Nazis to the secret annex. Despite extensive research, no conclusive evidence has pointed to a single individual or motive, but here are a couple of them. Willem van Maren. the warehouse manager, who was suspected of noticing activities suggesting the presence of people in hiding. Despite investigations, no evidence was found to confirm his involvement. There's also Tony Allers, a member of the National Socialist Movement in the Netherlands. Allers had connections to Otto Frank after the war. Some researchers, including Carol Ann Lee in her biography of Otto Frank, have suggested that Allers could have been the informant, possibly as a means of extortion. However, definitive proof hasn't been found. There's also Lena Hartog von Blatteren, the wife of a man working in the building where the Frank family was hiding. It was speculated that she might have informed on the Franks out of fear of repercussions for her own family, but yeah. And finally, there's Arnold van den Berg, a more recent theory proposed by a team of investigators using modern data analysis techniques suggests that Arnold van den Berg, a member of Amsterdam's Jewish Council, may have revealed the hideout's location to save his family from deportation and death. However, this theory too has faced criticism and skepticism from historians and scholars for the lack of concrete evidence. So the difficulty in conclusively identifying the betrayer stems from several factors. First, the lack of physical evidence. The Gestapo's records regarding the arrest were either lost or destroyed during the war, leaving a significant gap in documentation. There's also multiple suspects over the decades. Various individuals have been suspected, but evidence has also been circumstantial or speculative. And finally, just the general complexity of the situation. Occupied Amsterdam was a place of shifting loyalties, fear, and survival strategies. The motives for betraying the Franks could range from anti-Semitism, greed, or coercion by the Nazis, making it difficult to pinpoint a single reason or a single person. So with all of these factors, the question of who betrayed Anne Frank and her family may never be definitively answered. Missing Heinrich Muller. The mystery surrounding the fate of Heinrich Muller, the head of the Gestapo, which was just the secret state police of Nazi Germany, is another mystery of the post-World War II era. Unlike many high-ranking Nazi officials who were captured, tried, and sentenced during the Nuremberg trials or other post-war prosecutions, Muller's fate has remained uncertain, leading to various theories and speculations over the years. So before we get into some of those theories, here's a little background. Heinrich Muller, often referred to as Gestapo Muller to distinguish him from others with the same name, was a key figure in the security and intelligence apparatus of Nazi Germany. He played a significant role in the planning and execution of the Holocaust, the repression of resistance movements across occupied Europe, and the enforcement of Nazi policies of persecution and extermination. Muller was last seen in the Führer bunker in Berlin in the closing days of the war in Europe, around the end of April 1945. His presence in the bunker, participating in the meetings with Hitler and other high-ranking officials, is well documented, but his movements after leaving the bunker are a complete mystery. So let's jump into some theories. The first one is obviously his death in Berlin. This theory suggests that Muller died during the Battle of Berlin, possibly killed in the street fighting or committing suicide as Soviet troops captured the city. However, his body was never identified among those recovered from the city's ruins. Another theory states that Muller managed to escape Berlin and assumed a new identity elsewhere, possibly in South America, where many other Nazi officials found refuge after the war. Despite numerous investigations, no credible evidence has ever been found to support this theory. Some speculate that Muller was captured by either Allied or Soviet forces and either executed or imprisoned under a false identity. Given Muller's extensive knowledge of Nazi intelligence operations and war crimes, it's been suggested that he could have been useful to the Allies or Soviets for intelligence purposes. However, there are no records or admissions from any country's intelligence agencies to support this claim. Of course there haven't. And there obviously have been some unverified claims that Muller worked for a foreign intelligence service after the war, including the CIA or the KGB. While some documents have surfaced over the years suggesting the CIA was interested in locating Muller, there is no concrete evidence that he ever worked for them or any other intelligence agency. But yeah, if he did, that's what they would say. And if he didn't, you just don't know. The Nanjing Massacre, or the Nanking Massacre. This is also known as the Rape of Nanking, stands as one of the most brutal and devastating atrocities of the 20th century. Occurring during the Second Sino-Japanese War, this event shows the true horrors of war and the extreme violence inflicted upon civilians and prisoners of war. The massacre took place in the Chinese city of Nanking, which was then the capital of nationalist China, over a period of 6 weeks starting in December of 1937. Following a battle, the Imperial Japanese Army captured Nanking and subsequently unleashed a wave of violence, murder, rape, and looting against its inhabitants. So I don't want to get too in-depth with YouTube's algorithm and all that stuff, but the scale and brutality of the atrocities committed by Japanese forces during this period are staggering. Tens of thousands of Chinese soldiers who had been disarmed or taken prisoner were executed in mass shootings. The methods of the execution varied, including machine gunning, decapitation, and live burial. The Japanese soldiers committed widespread rape against women and girls of all ages. The estimates of rape victims vary widely, with numbers ranging significantly. The violence was also brutal, and many women were killed afterwards. Civilians, including children and the elderly, were not spared. They were killed in large numbers through both organized massacres and random acts of murders, with the death toll estimates roughly between 40,000 to over 300,000. The city itself was also subjected to widespread looting and arson. Many parts of Nanking were destroyed, leaving survivors without shelter and further exacerbating the humanitarian crisis. The Nanjing Massacre has been the subject of significant historical debate and controversy, particularly regarding the scale of the atrocities and the number of victims. In Japan itself, there has been a range of perspectives on the event, from outright denial or minimalization of the atrocities by some, and revisionist to acknowledge calls for apology and reparations from more liberal sectors of society. The Japanese government has issued statements of apology and expressions of remorse for wartime actions, including the events of Nanking. However, these statements have often been met with criticism for being perceived as insufficient or ambiguous, leading to ongoing tensions between China and Japan. So yeah, definitely a extremely painful and just horrifying chapter of the history of China, and just a reminder of the capacity for human cruelty in times of war. It's staggering. Germans escaped to Antarctica. The theory that Nazis fled to Antarctica after World War II and established a secret base there taps into the fascination with the Third Reich's clandestine operations and their interest in developing advanced technology. This narrative, while lacking concrete evidence, is a pretty interesting part of the post-war lore and conspiracy theories. I do admit, I find this stuff very fascinating. The genesis of the theory can be traced back to several key points. Prior to World War II, in 1938 and 1939, Germany launched an expedition to Antarctica, apparently for scientific and exploratory purposes. This expedition claimed a portion of Antarctica for Germany, naming it Neuschwabenland. The expedition's activities, combined with the geopolitical context of the era, laid the groundwork for future speculations about Nazi intentions in Antarctica. After the defeat of Nazi Germany, there were verified instances of Nazis fleeing to South America, as discussed previously, and other regions to essentially evade prosecution. These escape efforts were facilitated through various means, including the rat lines, and the leap from South America to Antarctica in these theories is partly based on the geographic proximity and the secretive nature of the Antarctic continent. So the core of the theory suggests that Nazis established a secret base in Antarctica, possibly using it to house submarines, aircraft, and even, as some speculate, UFO technology. This base, often referred to in conspiracy theories as Base 211 or New Berlin, was allegedly a site for continued scientific experiments and a potential refuge for high-ranking Nazi officials. So part of these experiments, including the development of the Glocke, or the bell, which I already talked about, but that could possibly be there. It's also kind of connected with the supposed crash of a UFO in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. Apparently, some people think that it's connected to this whole narrative, suggesting that the technology originated from the Nazis and not aliens. Or aliens, and then the Nazis used it and then flew it to New Mexico. And then there's also Operation Highjump in 1946 and 1947. The United States launched this military exploration and training mission in Antarctica, led by Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Some theorists claim that this operation was actually a covert military campaign against the remaining Nazis based in Antarctica. Admiral Byrd's comments about encountering fast and maneuverable aircraft during the mission have sometimes been taken to say that he was essentially battling Nazi flying saucers. So obviously this is a little bit more rooted in the speculative fiction than historical evidence, but nonetheless extremely interesting. Flight 19 Disappearance. The disappearance of Flight 19 is one of the most famous aviation mysteries and a cornerstone of the Bermuda Triangle legend. On December 5th, 1945, Flight 19, a group of 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers on a routine training mission, vanished without a trace off the coast of Florida. The incident not only led to an extensive search operation, but also fueled speculation and theories about the mysterious forces at play in the Bermuda Triangle. So, Flight 19 took off from the Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale, Florida, with 14 airmen led by Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor. The mission was a standard navigation exercise meant to take them east from the Florida coast, over the Atlantic, then north, and then finally back over the Gulf of Mexico to complete the triangle-shaped course. As the mission progressed, it became apparent that Flight 19 had become disoriented. The pilots reported malfunctioning compasses and confusion about their precise location. The weather conditions deteriorated, and radio communications became increasingly sporadic. Lieutenant Taylor, the flight leader, believed they were over the Gulf of Mexico, leading them to fly further east into the Atlantic in an attempt to reach Florida. The last communication from Flight 19 indicated they were deciding to fly due north, hoping to hit land. However, after this final transmission, nothing more was heard from the flight. A search and rescue operation was launched, and another plane also disappeared, presumed exploded, with 13 crew members on board, further deepening the mystery. The disappearance of Flight 19 has spawned a variety of theories, ranging from navigational errors to more fantastical explanations. The most widely accepted theory is that navigational errors led Flight 19 into the Atlantic, where they eventually ran out of fuel and ditched at sea. The area was known for its magnetic anomalies, which could have contributed to the compass malfunctions. And then there's theories about the Bermuda Triangle. The incident is often cited as evidence of the mysterious disappearances associated with the Bermuda Triangle, an area of the Atlantic Ocean bounded by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. Theories about the triangle involve paranormal or extraterrestrial forces. Some have speculated that methane hydrates released from the ocean floor could have created sinkholes of gas that reduced water density and caused ships and planes, including Flight 19, to sink. I will not elaborate. And there are also some theories suggesting a government cover-up, perhaps related to secret military operations or experiments that went awry, though there has been no evidence to support this. So maybe it was just a tragic navigational error. Moving on. Hans Kammler disappearance. Hans Kammler was a high-ranking SS officer and engineer who played a significant role in Nazi Germany's armaments and concentration camp constructions, including the construction of facilities for the V-2 rocket program and other secret weapon projects. As the war drew to a close, Kammler was involved in efforts to relocate these advanced weapons technologies and was last seen in the closing days of World War II in Europe. His subsequent disappearance has been the subject of so much speculation and mystery, but before that, a little bit of background. Kammler was born in 1901 and joined the Nazi Party and the SS, rising quickly through the ranks due to his organizational skills and technical expertise. He was responsible for the construction of several concentration camps and was deeply involved in the use of forced labor for the V-2 rocket program and other secret weapons projects. By the end of the war, he was overseeing the development and deployment of these advanced technologies. So as the Allied forces closed in on Nazi Germany from all sides, Kammler's whereabouts in the final days of the war become increasingly uncertain. Reports suggest that he was seen in early May 1945, around the area of Prague or in Lower Bavaria. What happened to him after these sightings is completely unknown. Most widely accepted theory, supported by some documentary evidence, is that Kammler unalived himself in May of 1945 to avoid capture by the Allies. According to this version, his body was either burned or buried in an unmarked grave, which was a common practice among high-ranking Nazis to avoid accountability. Another theory states that, like some of the other Nazi officials, he escaped to South America, and we've talked about that, so no need to elaborate. But some do speculate that Kammler was captured by either American or Soviet forces and then used for his knowledge of rocketry and advanced weapon systems, similar to how the U.S. utilized former Nazi scientists under Operation Paperclip. This theory suggests that Kammler's death was faked to conceal his cooperation with Allied forces, and honestly, Huntsville, Alabama, with all the rocket stuff up there, I mean, a lot of Germans went there. The 6-Hour War. The German invasion of Denmark on April 9th, 1940 is often referred to as the 6-Hour War because it was a swift and decisive military operation that marked the beginning of Denmark's occupation during World War II. This invasion was part of the German plan for the simultaneous invasion of Denmark and Norway, aimed at securing strategic control of the North Sea and securing supply lines to the vital iron ore from Sweden. Denmark's strategic importance to Germany was primarily due to its geographical location, which provided control over access to the Baltic Sea and could facilitate a more effective blockade of Germany by the British Navy. Despite Denmark's policy of neutrality in the years leading up to the war, the strategic necessity outweighed German respect for Danish neutrality. The invasion began in the early hours of April 9th, with German forces crossing the Danish border and advancing towards Copenhagen. The German military strategy relied on speed and surprise, classic, with an overwhelming force that aimed to compel the Danish government to surrender without significant resistance. The Danish military, aware of the impossibility of effectively resisting the well-equipped German forces, engaged in only limited combat. The Danes managed to shoot down several German aircraft, and skirmishes took place in several locations, including the border areas and a couple of air bases. However, the Danish government, seeking to avoid unnecessary bloodshed and the futile destruction of the country, chose to surrender only after a few hours of conflict. The official surrender was negotiated and completed on the morning of April 9th, making the invasion one of the shortest military operations of the Second World War. Following the invasion, Denmark was occupied by Nazi Germany until May of 1945. The Danish government remained in place in a cooperative arrangement that allowed for a significant degree of self-governance, which was unique among European countries occupied by Germany. This arrangement lasted until August 1943, when the German military assumed direct control of governance in response to increasing resistance activities. In general, the rapid invasion and occupation of Denmark demonstrated the effectiveness of blitzkrieg tactics and the strategic importance placed by the Axis powers on controlling the Scandinavian peninsula. The Mukden Incident. I think I'm pronouncing that right. The Mukden Incident, also known as the Manchurian Incident, occurred on September 18, 1931, and served as the pretext for the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, marking a significant escalation in the military aggression that would lead to the Second Sino-Japanese War. This event is a pivotal moment in the history of Japanese imperialism in Asia, just reflecting the broader themes of expansionism and the use of fabricated incidents to justify military action. In the mid-20th century, Japan had established a significant presence in Manchuria, a region of northeastern China, primarily through its South Manchuria Railway Company, which had extensive rights over railroads and associated infrastructure. Manchuria was strategically and economically important, rich in resources, and served as a buffer zone against the Soviet Union. The Mukden Incident was a staged event orchestrated by officers of the Japanese Kwantung Army stationed in Manchuria. The pretext for the invasion was a minor explosion near Mukden, modern-day Shenyang, on the South Manchuria Railway. Japanese military personnel covertly placed explosives to cause a section of the railway owned by Japan to be slightly damaged. Importantly, the explosion did not harm the full structure, and the train services continued shortly after, indicating the minor nature of the attack. Despite the minimal damage, the Japanese army accused Chinese dissidents of the act and used it as justification to launch an attack on the garrison at Mukden. This marked the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Manchuria. Following the incident, the Japanese quickly took control over major cities in Manchuria, and by February of 1932 had established the puppet state of Manchukuo, with the last Qing Emperor Huyi installed as the nominal head of state. The League of Nations conducted an investigation into the incident, which condemned the Japanese actions and led to Japan's withdrawal from the League. The Mukden Incident is significant for several reasons. It represents a clear example of how fabricated incidents were used by imperial powers to justify expansionist policies and military aggression. The incident and the subsequent occupation of Manchuria significantly deteriorated relations between China and Japan, setting the stage for the Sino-Japanese War. The global response to the incident highlighted the limitations of international organizations like the League of Nations in deterring aggression and maintaining peace. And in general, the Mukden Incident can be seen as one of the early steps leading to the broader conflict in the Pacific Theater during World War II. Swatstika Hijack. The swastika is an ancient symbol that has been used for thousands of years across various cultures around the world, embodying meanings of good fortune, well-being, and spiritual protection. Its hijacking by the Nazi Party in the early 20th century, however, dramatically shifted its perception, particularly in the Western world, where it is now more commonly associated with hate, tyranny, and the atrocities of World War II. So like I said, the swastika is an ancient symbol with a history that spans at least 5,000 years. It has been found in archaeological digs of the Indus Valley Civilization, ancient Greece, and in early Christian and Byzantine art. The term swastika comes from the Sanskrit word swatstika, meaning conducive to well-being. In many cultures, the swastika symbolize auspiciousness and good fortune. Its single design, a cross with arms of equal length, each bit at a 90-degree angle, can be found in both clockwise and counterclockwise forms, and has been used in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and among Native American and European cultures. The swastika was adopted by the Nazi Party in 1920, becoming the most prominent emblem of the party, and by extension, the Third Reich. The Nazis used a right-facing 45-degree rotated swastika as the centerpiece of the party flag. Adolf Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf that the swastika symbolized the mission of the struggle for the victory of the Aryan man, and was also intended to represent the creation of a racially pure state. This appropriation and the subsequent actions of Nazi Germany during World War II and the Holocaust forever altered these symbols' connotations. In the aftermath of World War II, the swastika became inextricably linked to the Nazi Party, its ideology, and its crimes against humanity. In many countries, especially in Europe, displaying the swastika is illegal if done in a way that promotes hate or violence. The symbol is banned in Germany, except for scholarly reasons, due to its association with hate speech and the promotion of Nazi ideology. But in some Eastern cultures, efforts have been made to reclaim the swastika's ancient meanings of peace and good fortune, particularly within religious context where it continues to hold spiritual significance. Obviously, these efforts face challenges due to the deep scars left by the events of the 20th century and the symbol's appropriation by hate groups worldwide. And finally, the location of Hitler's corpse. The fate of Adolf Hitler's remains after his death on April 30th, 1945, in his Führer bunker in Berlin, has been the subject of much speculation, mystery, and various reports over the decades. The official narrative, supported by Soviet accounts and later Russian statements, outlines a series of events leading to the ultimate disappearance of Hitler's identifiable remains. Hitler died by gunshot on April 30th, 1945, while his wife, Eva Braun, took poison. According to accounts, their bodies were carried out of the bunker, doused with petrol, and set on fire in the Reich Chancellery Garden above the bunker in accordance with Hitler's wishes not to have his body displayed or captured by the advancing Allied forces. The Soviet Red Army was the first to enter Berlin and locate the bunker. Upon discovering the charred remains of Hitler and Braun, the Soviets conducted a secret investigation and autopsy. The remains were moved several times in the following years to prevent any worship of Hitler's burial site by Nazi sympathizers. According to the most widely accepted account, based on Soviet and later Russian sources, the remains of Hitler, Braun, and several of their inner circle were ultimately buried in Magdeburg, on the premises of the KGB's Smersh unit. In 1970, fearing the discovery of the site and the potential for it to become a Nazi shrine, the KGB director, Yuri Andropov, ordered the remains to be exhumed once again. They were completely incinerated and their ashes were thrown into a river. Over the years, there have been various theories and claims regarding Hitler's death and the location of his remains. Some conspiracy theories suggest that Hitler had survived and fled to South America or other locations as previously discussed. And in 2009, DNA tests conducted on skull fragments that had been previously believed by some to belong to Hitler and were held in Russian archives were revealed to belong to a young woman instead, which definitely cast doubt on part of the evidence surrounding Hitler's death. However, for some reason, this revelation did not fundamentally alter the consensus among historians that Hitler did die in his bunker in 1945. But yeah, definitely a little foggy there. Anyways, that wraps up today's episode. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate you. If you're not subscribed already, definitely make sure to do that. It benefits me more than you know. I appreciate you watching, and I also appreciate my patrons, Jacob Ziegler, Dr. Swag, Drew Singal, Dates and Dead Guys, Jag, and Bean Fart and Ganja Girl. So, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.